My question for Tommy is, what superstar, if any, would he have liked to have seen become the world champion during the Attitude Era?
Let's see.
Were there any pitches that got shot down that you used for one of your other shows? Oh.
That's funny. Yes.
Jason has a non-wrestling comment.
Fuck you.
You have questions, we have answers. It's Tales from the Attitude Era.
Wow. What a catchphrase. You have questions, we have answers. That'd be a good promo.
I forgot what corporation had that in the 90s.
Oh.
You have questions, we have maybe it's like a search engine.
Lycos, Ask Jeeves.
Well, if you know, let us know. Oh, I guess Radio Shack. There we go.
Oh, of course.
There's the old Radio Shack.
Oh, I miss Radio Shacks. They were so cool.
R.I.P. Radio Shack.
Yeah. Oh, well.
I do miss it. Yeah. My first computer I bought from Radio Shack, a Tandy.
Nice.
That was their brand.
Yeah.
But we're here on Tales from the Attitude Era. It's Rob Pasbani here with former WWE head writer Tommy Blacha.
Questions and answers.
That's right. We're taking a break from the week-to-week grind of 2000 WWE as we're hung over from our Royal Rumble 2000 review.
Ooh, yeah.
And I've been compiling all these questions that you have been asking us, be it in the comments of the YouTube or at our email, tftattitudeera@gmail.com, which is always opened.
I don't think you have to say .com anymore unless you say www at the beginning. That's the
the email is gmail.com for sure.
Right.
No,
but you can just say at Gmail, I guess.
Yeah. But if they do it just at Gmail, the email program will be like, that's not a complete address.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. But you're right. You're right.
There's gmail.net,
you're right.
gmail.biz.
Right. Is there gmail.biz? But you're right.
I'm sure Google has registered all of them just because they're proactive.
www. All right.
Before we get, so this is all questions submitted by you, our wonderful attitudinals. I don't know what we call our fans.
Yeah. Tales from the Attitudinals.
And
smart marks, clean finish smart marks, schmaz smart marks.
Right.
A whole cornucopia of regular people and smart marks. Smarks.
Yes. And then just the regular marks, just the marks who aren't smart.
Yeah.
But not smart marks.
And the regular marks who are smart but aren't smart marks. That's a very important distinction, because there's a lot of great marks who are a lot smarter than smart marks.
Yes.
Okay.
Before we get into the user questions, one thing I wanted to ask you, which we keep wanting to bring up on the show, I figure what better time than now, is you keep mentioning how things are moving so fast that for the first 3 months, you weren't getting paid or you were getting like a stipend or something, and you never negotiated a contract with WWE until around this point, right? Around January Royal Rumble era.
Exactly. It was that fast. So at first it was great because I was getting paid like, come on down, you'll consult $1,000 a show. I'm like, okay. And then once it like came on board, it was just like balls to the wall. And then we're like, well, we'll figure all that out. And I really was at this point going like, okay, well, I'm still paying rent, my savings, whatever. I mean, everything was fine, but I was like, man, I think I got to like at some point push this. And my friends used to tease me like, because I'm like, oh, it's a big, huge, well-run organization. Look at all this. Everyone's getting paid. Numbers are through the roof. Everything's great. And he's like, dude, you're working for a wrestling promoter and you're not getting paid. And I'd be like, oh, that is. that does seem.
Yeah, you've read the stories.
So I made just one of the dumbest things I could have done, I think. So I got with Shane and I was like, I really got to like, kind of settle some kind of contract negotiation. And I didn't also like, didn't involve my agent at the time because I didn't want it to get like bogged down. I don't know. And then at the time also was like wrestling. So I just kind of said like, okay, let's just negotiate this. And it was just in a moment. He's like, like in a movie, he handed me a piece of paper and he was like, write down a number. So I'm like, oh, kind of unprepared, even though I'm an idiot, because I'm like, I got to push this. Hey, we got to get this settled out. Okay, write down a number. And immediately I'm like, oh, I'm totally unprepared for what kind of number do I write down? So I just thought like, wow, I'm making this. I made this at Conan. I want to make more, but I don't. I just was so taken aback and naive. So I wrote down a number, nice number, and I just handed it to him, and he goes, fine. And I'm like, God damn it. Damn it. Why didn't I just say, oh, no? And I was trying to joke like, oh, there's one more. My pen ran out. There's one more zero at the end. It's like another digit. So it was fine. And then, it was really fun getting that lump sum and taking it to the bank back in the day when you take it to the bank with that WWF logo, that check, and then the teller kind of looking like, why are you getting this much money from the you don't look that big. What are you? But so it's funny. I talked with Chris Jericho on his podcast, and he goes, I did the same thing. I went in for some, and in fact, his was even worse because whatever, a long time ago, I can't remember if it was Vince or someone. He goes, I want $100,000, and they're like, we're going to give you 130. And he's like, oh my God, I'm an idiot. If you're going to, and then he said his dad, who was a hockey player, did the same thing way back in the day. Said like, I'm going into the general manager's office. I want $30,000 a year. And they're like, we're going to give you 35. Like, oh, I'm an idiot.
That's really fascinating to me that you didn't have a number in your head.
Yeah.
Of what you thought you would, like going in, you were like, oh, I hope to get at least this much.
Yeah. It's called being naive, green, dumb, blockheaded.
Lesson learned. You're not making that mistake again.
Yeah. And even while I'm like there and I'm like, well, even in my mind, I'm like, well, I got to get something. I got to get this going. Okay. What's the number? Oh, I didn't think of that. Step one. Hey, did you ever think of step two? Huh? Yeah. But everything was fine. It was good.
Okay. All right. That's a great story, though. And I'm sure Shane went back to Vince being like, oh, you'll never guess how much we got him for.
Oh, those guys, who knows? I mean, they've overpaid, underpaid, but, yeah. Did they do that? Or was it even not worth mentioning, maybe? Who knows?
Yeah.
It's one of those things. But it is a little insight into, it's kind of funny because I'm walking around like, you know what? I just kind of shot my way into this upper echelon of like, behind the scenes pro wrestling. Everything's going great. And then like, oh, here's a little reminder. You're a dummy. Oh yeah, I didn't think of that. But oh well.
We have Brendan who asks, there are reports that Vince hated people yawning in meetings or employees putting their hand in a peanut jar instead of pouring the peanuts into their hand. Can Tommy shed light on whether these alleged Vince quirks were true, and are there any other Vince quirks?
There's some Vince quirks. That one's fun. It makes it sound like there was peanut. Why is there a peanut jar out and just him doing the meeting and seeing someone's hand and like, damn it. It was I used to smoke at the time, and I was one of the few people go have a smoke and hated smoking, but I used to smoke with Jack Lanza. And Jack Lanza could smoke anywhere because he's like Jack. So if you grabbed a smoke with Jack Lanza, it's fine. But you know what I mean? He did not like smoking. One time I was on this is funny, on the charter plane with him on the Learjet. We're going to the West Coast or something. And then he's like, huge sneeze. And then he goes, damn it. And then Stephanie goes, you're one of the few people to see Vince McMahon sneeze. It's like he wills away sneezing. Like she said, sometimes he'll be fighting like a sneeze, like, damn it, I'm not going to let this sneeze win. And it was the only time I ever saw him sneeze. So I never knew him to be very, immaculately dressed and groomed and all that all the time. I didn't see him to be such a germaphobe as I've heard people say. I didn't really see any of that, but but did not like sneezing. And then people getting sick. What is sick? What is this word sick? He didn't yawning. No, didn't like yawning. Didn't like that. Like,
right.
Yeah. And
definitely a sign. I mean, yawning you can control.
Yeah. Ridiculous.
We could bite it down. You don't have to actually do it.
I remember early. So, because oftentimes we'd be somewhere and we'd meet in his, like, he'd have a big room or a suite or something, and to go over stuff about like 7, it was like, okay, on the night in, we'll meet tomorrow for 7. And then we'd all have like breakfast and, whatever, hotel, and they'd have it delivered, at the table. So that was always something, you're always meeting very early. And one time I came in and I like, oh, how's it going or something. I was like, oh, I think I said something like little under the weather, this and that. And he's like, oh, that's a great testament to living. And he just like kind of tore into me a little. And I just clocked it like, oh, fucking never, ever do that around this guy. So then other times I'd see him like, it was funny because sometimes you'd see him like you'd be coming in early and he'd be either, his hair uncombed or something like, or one time I saw him like after a match and he was kind of like sitting in the locker room and kind of like the doctor at the time, the guy was going to give him like, some adjustments, the old French doctor. And he was just kind of like grimacing. And then I would like peek my head and be like, how's it going? Like just because you could see him go like, great. Like he would not be caught ever going like, I'm kind of stiff. No, you know what I mean? Like just nothing like that ever. So it became kind of fun to be like, oh, I'm catching a small glimpse of him like, his hair's out of place or something, or he's like kind of, stiffening his shoulder. No, I mean, not a moment. You'd be like, you're just kind of like, how's it going? Shoulder stiff? Oh, what are you talking about? No way. Like just, so that's a big quirk. Well, would not, be caught dead grimacing.
I remember when Kevin Nash tore his quad, he said he would not go backstage until he was fully recovered because he didn't want to sell being in pain.
Yeah.
And mentioned how also there was the time when Vince tore both of his quads and just started walking after like 3 weeks. Like his recovery time was insane.
Yeah.
Like almost unheard of compared to a normal human being.
Well, even that time he tore both quads, he's sitting in the ring that one, almost just kind of with that weird look, like people are like, what is he sitting there for? Yeah. It wasn't like, oh, I'm hurt. Like, yeah. In fact, also when I first got there, he was recovering from a motorcycle accident. He had some big crazy motorcycle that had like a 350 small block engine in it or something, and he crashed it and hurt his hip or something and never sold anything. And then I know because when I first met Linda and stuff we were talking about, she's like, I had to negotiate with him in order for him to get rid of the motorcycle. He was allowed to get like a bull mastiff dog or something. Something. Oh. Yeah, it's like, all right, I'll negotiate. I'll get rid of the motorcycle, but I want a bull mastiff. All right. So the little behind the scenes of the domestic.
Yeah, and I think Stephanie even has bull mastiffs now.
Yeah,
too.
I'm sure.
That's their breed.
Well, because I can't buy a rhinoceros, I'll get a bull mastiff. But yeah. So those are the quirks. And besides the other quirks that were the quirks that were also maddening, that are well known, were like, well, if you don't want anyone to say the belts or the straps, fucking tell people. You know what I mean? That there was a weird thing like, oh, like things would pop up like, oh, and sometimes at this era, someone wouldn't know, like if they would make this motion, because we're going to go for the straps. Vince, God damn it, that's passe. He would get pissed and be like, well, oh, so you'd have to kind of sneak and like, don't say that. Or, or even the segue from wrestlers to soup, never say wrestlers, but it wasn't in a manual or anything. I think later they did kind of like put things out there, but there was no.
Yeah, I remember seeing that. There was like, don't say this, say this.
Yeah, and I think that came out of people being like, because some people would be frustrated, like, well, why am I in the doghouse? Well, you said fucking belt. Huh? I didn't, things like that. So.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to ask, what was your cigarette brand of choice?
Oh, I used to smoke these. I used to smoke the what was the Native American Spirits.
Oh, yeah, fancy ones.
Yeah,
very nice,
fancy. Yeah,
I mean they're always like $1 or $2 more expensive. They're organic.
Yeah, well they were supposedly had no additives, but back then they weren't that much more expensive really. Back in this is.
Yeah, I was always a Parliament Lights guy. Oh, my Eastern European heritage coming out.
Oh, is that right? Parliament Heights.
I feel like a lot of Russians smoke Parliament Lights.
I didn't know that.
I don't know, or like Marlboro Menthol.
I had some of the Russian friends I had would smoke occasionally have some Russian cigarettes. They were fucking awful.
Yeah,
I can't remember what they were. Yeah, I'm from Detroit. I used to smoke menthols as a kid in high school. It wasn't until I joined the Army where I started like. Hanging around like some Southern white people. Like, what the hell? What are you? You're not black. I'm like, huh? And then be like, yeah, only black people smoke menthols, Newports. It was like a weird anomaly. Like, oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't know about that stereotype until much later in life myself.
Yeah. Funny.
Jamin asks, Tommy, what years did the bleach blonde buzz cut start and stop?
Oh, boy, I guess somewhere around just before I got to wrestling, I had the bleach blonde, and then I don't know, about a year, 2 years, 90s, you know, all that stuff. Everclear bullshit, bleach blonde, Hollies. Looked like a Holly.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
A couple years.
I did it once and I felt like it like burned my hair and I was like, I should probably not.
Well, but yeah, but for you, and it's like your hair, geez, it's like, you know, the Japanese cats or the Mexican cats who have real thick, dark hair. I have this thin bullshit that's gone now. They'd be like, oh, dye it. Oh, pfft, like that. That stuff, you need like 5 treatments and then it turns orange. You know, you always see like some of the, you know, the Japanese cats would try to get like bleach blonde, but it'd be like orange. It's like, oh, I need 9 treatments because you got that, you know, but I'm not sad for you. Like, wah, your thick, dark hair, wah, won't bleach blonde. Yeah.
That was definitely my problem. It could only get like gold.
Yeah.
It wouldn't get like bleach blonde.
Yeah. Mine would get like that. And then but sometimes you'd look like it was so thin, it'd be blown in the wind. I'd look like a baby doll that had been left in the attic for a few years. And then I'm like, it's got to go. It's all got to go.
Virgil Zandig asks,
good name. Strong name.
Yes, very strong. Not storyline related, and maybe you've already covered it, but how much attention was paid to Jakked/Metal? Did you ever try to pitch something to be done on those shows to get those C shows to get some angles? Or were they more afterthoughts, especially with Heat being the B show, right?
Yeah. No, we had, it's almost like if someone would have brought that up. Hey, about something for Jack. Are you fucking kidding? We had to write Heat in 5 minutes based on what was, you know, on Raw. But they were just more ancillary shows that were pretty much video packages. Sometimes I didn't even know they existed at all. So, you know, Heat was the wonderful thing where you could try things out and what have you. So Jakked was more for like whatever the studio wanted to do. And like I always talk about the machine, you know, if they wanted to roll in some video packages or whatever. So they were just, you know, little late night syndicated things they could throw together to just have more TV shows.
Yeah. And really like the purpose those served is like we've discussed is for people who don't have cable access to catch up on the main storyline.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the real.
And they were so smart, just throwing out new, fresh, like they had one called Metal at one point, didn't they? They had a show, WWF Metal. I'm like, what is it?
I think Jakked and Metal were the same show, just in different markets.
Oh, okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, could be. And
like it was the same matches.
Yeah.
Different wraparounds.
But they were great because you'd see like just a quick, like you said, a quick paced, like, you know, bring up to speed of what's happening, you know? Some action.
Yeah,
some stuff.
It was before there was 20 hours of wrestling on television every week, where you kind of could use it. I used to love the morning shows. I was a Superstars Wrestling Challenge kid. That's how I consumed my wrestling. And I do have a fondness for those shows that, like, I feel that's really missing. Just the slower pace, you know, and let the announcers kind of have a little more fun.
I agree. And even if you look at like the NFL, there's how many ancillary shows are there on whatever, FS1, ESPN that are like, hey, let's look at this angle and here's some clips and you know what I mean? And just ridiculous, you know, ways to, you know, redistribute the same information, but it's kind of like exciting, especially like, you know, when I was there, it was 5 original hours of programming a week and then like these other shows. So like, yeah, why not? I agree.
Yeah, sometimes 8 with the pay-per-view. Think about it. Steven asks, was Jim Cornette hard to deal with? Did you interact with Jim Cornette at all during your time there?
I only met him when he was visiting once. So no, one of my favorites, frankly. And I always I encourage anyone to like listen to his podcast and stuff, never without an opinion and, you know, ready to go. And pretty much 90% always right, I think, about things. So unfortunately, you know, he was not there when I was there at all.
And then people just stop by all the time, right? Like based on where you are in the country, you'd always get a legend popping in.
Yeah, without a doubt. You know, I remember, just being in like, you know, whatever at catering or something. And then Michael Hayes, like, you know, holy shit, there's Buddy Roberts. And, you know, and I introduced myself. And then at the time, I think he had He's had throat cancer or something, but just was like, I'm in Houston. There's Ernie Ladd. Oh my God, went and put him over. And I saw you at Cobo Arena with the injured thumb, and and usually that was one of the actually all the moments we talk about. Like sometimes it's just like where I can't remember, Florida, I think, or whatever. Just watching the monitor backstage, and then just feel a little like nudge next to me, and then I turned, and it's just like Greg the Hammer Valentine, and it's like, holy shit. That was always more thrilling than like, yeah, whatever. It's like just, and usually they're all appreciative to just be put over and like, yeah, all kinds.
So you grew up in Detroit, in the Detroit area at the Sheik's promotion.
Correct.
What was the name of
Well, it was funny because it was like the TV show was always like Big Time Wrestling, and it was odd. So the Sheik was always the United States champion, so it was part of NWA, but they never, as I watched it as a kid, they never really said, we're NWA or whatever. It was odd. It was just like Big Time Wrestling. Sheik had a belt, Pampero Firpo. Sometimes it was these guys, IWA, but then that went away. And then we would also get Maple Leaf Wrestling on TV. So really, we didn't have that sense of like that 3-letter federation, so to speak. So, and I know the Sheik's NWA, it was really territory driven, where you'd feel like, I remember as a little kid thinking like, wow, Detroit's the pro wrestling center of the universe. And then we went to visit some cousins in Pittsburgh, and they talked about, Bruno Sammartino. I'm like, who's that? And, you really feel like, oh, it was a con. They made all the territories kind of made you feel like you were the center of it. But so I didn't, it wasn't until later in the 80s, and then the WWF came in and whatever. And when I lived in Chicago, you'd kind of you'd get everything. But so it was just, and I know that the Sheik's belt was kind of funny because he was only in Detroit, kind of a weirdly NWA sanctioned United States champion. So he always had the belt a lot. But I think they still had another United States champion and a TV champion. And then those belts would sometimes go away. And as always joked about, like, so the Four Horsemen could all have belts. Like Barry Windham's is the Western States Heritage Champion. Where did that go? And, belts just they're just gone, or they're here.
The U.S. tag team titles was always fascinating to me. Like, what? Yeah. A secondary tag team title? Like, that's how you know.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a lot of belts.
There was some 6-man tag team belts for a bit there.
Yeah, I like the trios titles. So who were your guys growing up?
Well, there's Crybaby George Cannon here. There's the Sheik, who was the ultimate. In fact, he had a bar called the Sheik, and we would kind of like, you'd go in and sometimes you could see them all actually dressed, and they used to have belly dancers in there. Remember that? There's the Mongols. There was like the Fabulous Kangaroos, Pampero Firpo, Bobo Brazil. Ernie Ladd would come in and out. Guys like that. George Cannon.
Did you have
He was like I said, my brother used to sell. He was an unlicensed pharmacist to a lot of local wrestlers back in the 70s, put it that way. But George Cannon I met a few times, and we used to go, and always, even as a little kid, would always root for heels. And then would always like George Cannon at like a TV taping at like Cobo or something. We'd get right behind him and just call him fat ass and stuff, and talk about how his chair was going to break. And then, because he would always like, look sad, and that he was Crybaby Cannon, but then in between, like before the camera wasn't on, he'd like flip us off and stuff. So lots of fun stuff like that. But the Sheik was my guy.
Did you have like a gimmick for yourself growing up?
No, I didn't.
Like, did you have a gimmick for you?
No, there was a guy used to go. There was a couple characters at Cobo when I was real little that had their own self-proclaimed gimmicks with like T-shirts and stuff, and trying to work their way into the business, but kind of like didn't know how, I guess. But then of course started going to like the WWF matches, and in the late 70s and 80s saw some great stuff. Saw one of the greatest things was Bret Hart versus Jim Neidhart. They were together, obviously, and so very early, and Bret Hart was wearing like the red trunks. So they had a time limit draw. And then it was one of the funniest things I've ever seen. So then as it was over, Bret Hart calls for a microphone, pretty rare. And he goes, hey, in his like Canadian accent, So these people came here to see, and you would appreciate this being a clean finish, smart Mark. He goes, they came here to see a finish, you know? So like, what do you say we put 5 more minutes on the clock, see if we can get this thing done, something of that nature. And then and Neidhart had rolled out, so he was like looking around, and like everyone's like, yeah. And Neidhart like, all right, he gets back in. They proceed to run the ropes, and I'm not kidding, probably about 12 times, intersecting each other, like, you know, bouncing off the ropes, slowly missing each other. I mean, like so many times, and the crowd started to swell. It was like, this is ridiculous. They're just, I've never seen anything like it. And then Neidhart rolls out and you forget it. Boo! And that was it. And it was just like, it always stuck with me. It was like, that was one of the stupidest, and I mean that with all, most wonderful, strange gaga spots I've ever seen. Yeah, fantastic. And Jesse Ventura, Rene Goulet, we'd always interact with him, you know, get down there, kinds of like, Morocco was great all the time. Nothing like Morocco selling this huge guy when Hogan would give him the like the back nails, and he'd like, ow, just act like, that hurts so bad. It's like as if, you know, and like just, yeah. Oh, who used to roll out by us and do all kinds of stuff. Probably one of the greatest, most underrated wrestlers of all time, in my estimation. And he's well regarded, but Cowboy Bob Orton Sr. I mean, that guy, if you look at his old matches, he's downright hilarious in the way he's, you know, sells those atomic drops and just the stuff he'd do and the inventive selling.
Bob Orton Jr., you mean?
Yes.
Senior.
Yeah, sorry. Third generation. My bad.
Yes.
Thanks. Good call.
Yes.
Good save there. Yes. But yeah.
Yes.
Cowboy Bob Orton. Just incredible.
Ricky asks, do you have any stories about Kane? Any interactions with Kane backstage you'd like to share?
Yeah. Kane was pretty like quiet, smart. I remember like getting to know him once and talking about, he had like, him and his wife had a place, and he had like, I can't remember what kind of dogs. He raised like these little dogs. So it goes, oh yeah. Just talk a lot about his dog, but he was just this pretty quiet guy, obviously well respected. But I have the greatest, these are in my memory, always like the greatest moments sometimes aren't big and in the ring, but this was so great. So this was in Dallas, and Dallas was one of the places they had the full gym there, I guess, for the Dallas Mavericks. So usually when the guys would come in, they'd be like, they get their itinerary, like, here's the local gym to go work out, because they'd go get a workout in, and often they couldn't do it at the arena. But Dallas had a full gym that they could use. So they would come in early and use the gym in the arena, Reunion Arena in Dallas. So it was Prince Albert, who, what is he? 6'8", 315 or whatever, massive guy, right? He's working out in there with Kane. And then there's someone who's just like worked for like, the catering services for the arena or something. You know, there's always people there like, you know, doing stuff that work for the arena. And it was this like small, like older black gentleman. I remember it was like, he was out there like looking, and Prince Albert comes out of like the gym, the gym room there, all sweaty, and you hear weights going. So here's this guy, 6'8", 317, and I'm in the hallway, and he comes out and he goes, holy shit, I cannot believe how strong Kane is. And I just remember this man who was probably like in his 60s, like looking at, well, and then hearing the weights being lifted there, and like, if you're saying this, you're like one of the biggest, craziest, strongest people I've ever seen, just all sweaty, just amazed, going like, I can't fucking believe it. Strong. And you just heard the noise in there, and that guy's going like, what the fuck is in the gym? It was just a moment, but it was just so fucking funny, because he was like, you know, and if you look at just Kane through the years, he is one of those guys, you know, you see, let's face it, you see guys go up and down a little, 20, 30 pounds, maybe they using a little bit of a hamburger helper here and there. But Kane is a guy that's just like, oh, I got a pretty 20-year clip. Wasn't until he gets in his 40s and stuff like, oh, I guess he's not quite as jacked up, but he's, you know, just a remarkable athlete, you know, just like this straight up guy, you know, and it was funny and pretty quiet, you know, and just like, That kind of just like the character in a way, like, oh, he's someone just, I wouldn't fuck with that guy, but he doesn't really get into all the stories of all the shoot videos and stuff, because he was just like straight up solid. I think, no strip clubs, no wild stories, just,
He's a good old boy.
Yeah, definitely.
That's interesting. A YouTuber asks, Tommy, what do you think about the current state of WWE and NXT? If you're following right now, do you think it's the era of women's wrestling? And is it actually pretty good in its own right? Totally different than it used to be, and different than the female divas before, way more athletic. So I guess he's asking, what do you think about the current state of WWE, and how do you feel about the evolution of women's wrestling?
Well, frankly, I kind of go in and out of watching it. And I'm always like more, for whatever reason, like interested in the weird indies or whatever. Frankly, I watch like AEW more, and for the past so many years, I would always be a little bit more interested in NXT than WWE. Although there's like, certainly like people I like. The product for me gets a little bit too polished and overproduced, I think, and can border on being like a little bit of a yawner or predictable. As far as the women's, like, certainly I think people shit on the divas stuff, and maybe rightfully so, but the thing you have to know about pro wrestling is always like, why did that explode? It's because that A&E show numbers went through the roof. You know what I mean? While the other stuff was down. So wrestling will always pander to the popularity, the numbers. So that kind of like, is something I don't, you talk about like, this is a conscious decision to do this or to make them diminished like that. And that it did turn out like that. So I think, certainly it is a little bit, certainly more athletic and what have you, but I'm still looking for, I do like Charlotte Flair, but I'm still like looking for, it's still the aesthetic of it still, and the naming of them. And I guess I don't want to say this in a bad way. Like if you had someone who didn't know anyone and you put up their headshots, if you had someone who was naive about pro wrestling and porn and you put up their headshots and their names, you'd be like, pick the porn star, pick the wrestler. Just that kind of, you know what I mean? That aesthetic of like
right.
that makeup, those names. I wish it would get a little more, I don't know, individualistic or just something, and that's not.
It's just not for you, it sounds like.
Yeah, but
you understand why they're doing it, but it's not what you're looking for.
Yeah, and yet, I always gravitate towards the, New Japan and certain things. And so I have my certain favorites, but I think overall there's still that kind of aesthetic that drives it is a little like, it's like little diminishing returns for me personally.
Did you get a chance to see Lucha Underground when it was on the air? Was that a little more?
Yeah, I loved Lucha Underground. I thought it was great. I thought it was really interesting. And especially like I said, sometimes it's a little bit of a exception to the rule for me, like, oh, things are overproduced and storylines are cinematic, but that one just worked for me because it was so, and down in Boyle Heights, and I went and saw it when I lived in LA, and it was just like, I don't know, the whole thing worked, and just the way it was shot, it just was refreshing and different and cool, and I wish it still was around. It really worked for me on a lot of levels. So yeah, I loved it.
Hot Rock asks, did you work at all with Patrice O'Neal while he was in the writing room?
No, I didn't. Not at all. That was after me. Yeah.
Okay. Mark from Canada has a bit of a longer.
Oh, I wish there was a wrestler called Mark from Canada. Mark from Canada.
Being a fan of the Attitude Era, this might be my favorite wrestling podcast.
Oh.
I made sure to leave that part in. I love hearing the Raw, SmackDown, and pay-per-view recaps. I love the inside details that only Tommy can provide, as he was there behind the scenes. Love the interviews with Will Sasso, Andy Richter, and David Koechner. I had no idea David was the guy protesting the WWF with the tall sign. I also appreciate you guys acknowledge not everyone had cable, and SmackDown was the only WWF TV show available to those of us deprived of cable TV.
Nice.
Oh, all right. So far, we're doing well. The only criticism I can think of is when you guys discussed The Rock's first SNL hosting gig. You said that along with The Rock, Triple H and Big Show were on the show. How could you forget to mention Mick Foley? Oh, my goodness. How could we forget?
Yeah.
Clearly, the WWF is marketing the McMahon in every corner WrestleMania 2000 main event. Also, I'm surprised you failed to notice that the guy Triple H punches in the audience is SNL writer Mike Schur, who went on to write The Office and played Dwight's cousin, Moose? I don't know. Co-created Parks and Rec, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and The Good Place. I suppose I'm a research mark, perhaps a research smart mark.
Yeah.
Either way, this was the only gripe I had with the podcast.
That's not bad. That's not bad for those gripes. And, the Mick Foley not mentioned was, I think, just by saying, then this and that, and I just didn't add it on. But if you look at all the other shows, no, I put Mick Foley over like no one ever, the greatest. So
yes.
So that was just a brain fart. And as far as the guy who gets punched, and I wrote that segment we'll have a whole show.
Yeah, we're gonna do a whole episode on that.
And there's interesting how that all came about. It's very interesting. But so that was the way out of that segment was like, I'll beat up this guy here. That was going to be me. And then Tina Fey, she was the head writer there. She's like, because I had the bleach blonde thing. She's like, you look a little maybe too interesting, like you're in on the wrestling thing, which I agreed. So let's get him. Maybe it's funnier, because he seemed a little more nerdy. So, but it worked great.
He looked like a herb.
Yeah, but it worked great because he just like was that thing of like, I'll grab you by the hair, you just hold my wrist and pull him away, and So years later, I think, that could have been me, but oh well. I had my time as the security guard that got intimidated by Goldust and Conan, and of course, delivering a hand, the infamous hand baby.
Mark concludes, I love what I've heard so far and will continue to listen.
Nice.
Thank you, Tommy and Rob, for the trip down wrestling memory lane. A pleasure, Mark.
The trip down wrestle lane.
Patrick writes, big fan, love the show. My question for Tommy is, what superstar, if any, would he have liked to have seen become the world champion during the Attitude Era? And for you, Rob, what is your most memorable match during the Attitude Era?
Well, let's see. I would say Rikishi.
You think he deserved the big gold?
I just think I'm always fascinated seeing that guy work. And sometimes you're like, wow, like I said before, he's 400 pounds. He's throwing high kicks. He's doing like, kind of like, I would like to have seen some bigger, longer, high profile matches.
Yeah.
And not like he wasn't handled good, not like he doesn't have a spectacular career, but that may have been, something I would have liked to have seen.
As far as my favorite thing from the era, if it's exclusively like what you wrote, or like while you were on staff, I would probably say that Cactus Jack Triple H match is like really, really high up there.
Yeah.
The street fight, the maybe the like peak of the like spectacular storytelling would have been the Armageddon Hell in a Cell match, right? That was 2000, right? With the Rikishi bump into the truck. Was that you?
No,
or was that after you?
Well, even when it was after, but I appreciate the rub about like involving me in the Cactus Jack Triple H thing, but it's like I have nothing to do with it.
No, it was all you. It was all you.
Thank you, thank you for all the Well, that was a vicious match. I mean,
just storyline wise, I've gone on record of saying how much I've like personally find joy in the Mae Young ongoing antics. Like it was so good, and I feel like the Mae Young thing, there's no analogous to it in any other era.
No,
because there's only like other than her again, in 10 years down the road, because there would be no other woman that could take that kind of punishment and kind of have the comedic timing that she did,
and spanning the eras, and just like and like you said, like that piano, just like for this thing of wrestling, which is like that evolved to the like I'm doing something, I hear some music, and then there's an impact from a character being introduced. But that fucking piano and hitting her and just like all these, just like, what the fuck is going on? It's just like such a, because most all the other ones fall into these parameters of like, I'm saying something and I'm busted, or Austin's music, but that piano and that like, excuse me, it's just so wonderfully odd. Yeah, I hear you.
I guess my favorite would have been like the TLC matches, because the Hardys meant a lot to me during that time. I felt like they were my avatar in WWF for like where I was as like a 15-year-old kid. And my favorite pay-per-view probably of all time is WrestleMania 17. I think front to back, minus the concluding angle with Steve Austin turning.
How fun. We should just go on for an hour and you just start naming everything.
Yeah, and then I also liked WrestleMania 18 when it was The Rock and Hogan. I marked out really hard at that. I'll do a whole episode of just me naming.
And then I liked,
you don't have to be there for it.
Of course I liked the Royal Rumble at Madison Square Garden. And of course I like
like the one where Haku came back. That was great. That was great. It was a real surprise because you thought he was still Meng in WCW.
We should just do like
we
should just do a dissolve and me like just sitting here and then of course and I did really like the Jakked, even though people don't talk about Jakked, but that one Jacked reprisal of the
there was all that whole Sunday Night Heat story arc that Raven had that wasn't even on the main show. Patrick concludes his letter writing, P.S. Let Tommy know Rudy died.
This is a story about a Chihuahua that died. That's all I'm going to say.
Oh, okay.
Ultra smart marks have to figure the rest out.
Jason has a non-wrestling comment.
Fuck you.
Kinda. He goes, hey, yo.
Oh, nice.
Love the podcast. Anywho.
Pretty good.
Continues. I bought your book. You drive like an asshole.
Oh, my goodness.
And your parking sucks too. Yeah. I love the idea of the tear out pages. I really appreciate the contents page where you gave the page number for each note. Too bad the pages aren't numbered. Oh, wait. Did you write the page numbers in invisible ink? You write books like an asshole.
No,
anyway, big fan.
That's fantastic. I appreciate that. And that's all the publisher. And some of the font was unreadable, which pissed me off too, but that's the publisher.
What's this book?
It's a book that my wife, Allison, my wife, she wrote a couple fashion books, and then the same publisher said to her, "Is like, do you know anyone who could write a book like about how much it sucks for people park and how they drive?" And she's like, "Yeah, my husband." And then because they had a different book that was like tear out letters, so I was like, "Yeah, I'll do it." And it was like back in the day, just at the time before all this stuff went away and internet writing or whatever. So I just wrote this book like really quickly, and it was like funny because I would tease my wife was working really hard on her book. I'm like, I'm going to write my book in like 3 hours max. And I would just, if I was out driving, I would just clock things in my mind, people that would piss me off. And then, so the book is all these like letters of like, hey, person with the bumper sticker about your kid that goes to high school, gets, honor roll and just all this shit. So it became really fun, but wrote it really fast, sent it in, got a little scratch, and it's still out there and making, I think I'm making residuals anywhere from $130 to $300 a year.
Oh, wow. Ooh.
Yeah.
It's a nice steak dinner for you and your wife.
Not at a fancy steak place, but like at Longhorn, which I like very much. Best mid-priced steakhouse around. Oh. Longhorn Steakhouse.
Is that better than Outback?
Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Longhorn.
All right.
Yeah.
Jonathan asks, who do you guys think was the in-ring MVP of 1999? He says he's a 3XL, by the way, for the Clean Finish Smart Mark shirts, I guess.
Wow. Who is the in-ring MVP? In-ring MVP meaning, I not just promos, not just over that way, meaning actual work. My God. I can't believe I'm about to say what ooh.
Mae Young?
No, I'm boy. 1999. I'm thinking of the whole year. In ring. God damn it. Maybe Triple H.
That was my thought too. Of in that moment, like late 99 to early 2000. He's the one kind of carrying the work rate.
Yeah, and he was a little like necessary because there's that new kind of weird heel you needed because Austin got hurt, but The Rock is a babyface that acts like a heel, sort of in some respect, you'd say. So, and The Rock's work is great in the ring, but yeah, like he was a workhorse and he elevated, and did a lot of things, and covered a lot of stuff. I'm gonna say him. Isn't that crazy? Yeah. I wouldn't have thought that. When that question, I'm kind of surprised.
Yeah, I would agree with it too, because even with, like, The Rock is the overall MVP, but he's not the one having he's not having matches with like Rikishi and all these other guys. And like I remember there's a moment about like a month away from where we are in the timeline where Taz has to go back to ECW to win the ECW title for Mike Awesome, who's leaving for WCW. Right. And then Taz on SmackDown with the ECW title took on Triple H, who's the world champion.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
And of course, Triple H has to go over. Yeah. They're not going to let a smaller promotions world champion win. But even that was an interesting match.
Yeah.
And he was doing all that stuff.
And I think of him, and I don't know how much this goes in, but it should, I guess, hyperextending his knee. McMahon before and all that, and just continuing and never missing.
Yeah, carrying McMahon through that main event while being injured. Yeah. That's a lot of credit. I have to. Yeah. And those few weeks where he could barely walk, but still showed up for TV and you wouldn't even know.
And I bet if you added up all the in-ring time, he probably was in there more than anyone.
Gavin asks, gentlemen, Tommy, did you ever have any input on bringing people in? You mentioned that Taz was a Russo hire. Did you ever try to get Detroit legend Russ Kavanagh a paycheck? Russ Kavanagh. Yes, sorry.
Well, you'd never say, "Hey, bring this in," and I never got to that level. And I never, like I said, the difference of me, I was just there to get everyone over. Most of that stuff would happen with like, what do you think of this guy? You'd show you something, you just, kind of give your opinion. But it's funny about where we're at right now in looking at all the shows, like shit like this would happen. So the last show we did, like Royal Rumble 2000. So it was within this week or the next couple weeks, I was in Stamford, and Stamford has its own gym, and then just like looked in the gym and like, oh, there's Dean Malenko, Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, and Perry Saturn just milling about, and just like, holy shit, 4 of them. So the roster was so loaded, but there was so much to do as far as like, and then they brought 4 in there. So it's like, you got to deal with those guys. So there really was no like, hey, you should bring this guy in or look at this guy. Most of that stuff was just happening. So,
and it felt like they kept the roster pretty tight.
Yeah.
It's not like now where there's 200 people.
Yeah.
It's like, I feel like there was less than 50 maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I agree. Yeah. That's a big thing too. Yeah.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting when the Radicalz come in, because I was thinking like they really shift the balance of the evenness of the heels and faces, because they start as 4 baby faces and then they become 4 heels, and then you have to find faces to work with them. It's we'll get into
it. That was always a thing. Oh god, we need, it was just like, oh shit, we need heels suddenly. Oh shit, we need baby. Right.
Gavin also asks, were there any pitches that got shot down that you used for one of your other shows? Oh,
that's funny. Yes. So there was probably one of my favorite things ever that was just too impossible to pull off. So I don't know, it was phrased to me like, yeah, what would be the most spectacular thing you'd want to see or whatever? I said, like, how about, and the Big Show was afraid of minis. We call them minis now. Back then we used the M word, but midget. But so we call them, minis, and be like, hey, what if, the Big Show, there was like a kind of a faction of minis, right? That kind of like were bothering him. Okay. And then, so it's like, what if they were masked in whatever they wore, It was just all like uniform, utilitarian, like maybe like just black with black masks. And then kind of felt like this would carry on. And I said, but it's like, however we built it a bunch of different ways, but it culminated in the big show going against like 4 or 5 of them or whatever, like some crazy match like this. But then all through the arena, we just have it from every corner said like, you hire every athletic mini and every mini worker in the world you could possibly do, get the number as high as it could be. And I mean like 100 to 200 to 300. And they just start descending down and just like, and they almost, I was like, they're like bees. They just, or ants, they just sacrifice each other. And he can't, it's just, and call them the swarm. But even almost like we would lead up with Taz or with Jericho, I wanted to like construct, and I did a little bit of my own, like this video package that just showed like, you ever seen footage of like one big bug being eaten by a bunch of little bugs, like a lizard being taken down by 1,000 ants. Just get a bunch of footage like that, and like it would just come in and would say the swarm is coming, and you'd say, what the hell does that mean? The swarm, and just feed it like that. And so just make this incredible, like it's almost like, did you ever see in the Hulk, there was someone like the leader had all these like humanoids that were kind of like made of rubber, and like the Hulk could like, they keep coming, smash, I can't, it's just like they're interchangeable, they sacrifice. What are they? So that was like this like weird fantasy thing, and Vince was like, he said the weirdest, he's like, that's great, start producing it. And I'm like, well, and then you're left with that, like, what the fuck does that mean, start producing it? Like, where's the budget? So I started like even talking to some promoters and like, talking to Pat Patterson. Oh, how are you going to pull that off? And then it started to be like, oh, well, then we need like different, how do we facilitate having 100 people backstage? Like, oh, we'd have to have some RVs. And then one time I called and like, well, you can't do it in April because it's picking season. And a lot of them were working on the fields in Mexico, all this like crazy shit. And like, oh, and it just couldn't be pulled off by that time I left. So, but I did put it in my wrestling cartoon I did for Adult Swim called Mongo Wrestling Alliance. And there was an episode about
that was a great hit. Yeah.
The swarm. But that was, so I wouldn't say that was shot down, but it was kind of like the logistics of it were tough.
That would have been quite memorable.
Yeah.
If that happened. Yeah. I like that.
Yeah. And then it was kind of like, could it be truncated? And I was like, no, it's got to be, you could do it with 10. Sure, but like the best would be just like camera cuts in each court and just down the aisles and just like, didn't happen. But that would have been so, That
would have been great. You can watch Mongo Wrestling Federation exclusively on adultswim.com on a computer. That's the only way to stream it.
Yes, Mongo Wrestling Alliance. And
Alliance, I'm sorry.
Believe me.
Mongo Wrestling Alliance. MWA, I get it.
The things you had to do to just name a new wrestling federation was unbelievable. Went through all these, we can't do that. Had to be cleared. And you know what I mean? And like, so yeah. Anyway.
Does WWE own federation?
No, it was more just the pain in the ass lawyers. Cause it would be like, if you put something like, whatever, Northern Wrestling Alliance, it could be like some kid would buy the, the .com on like, what is the service that sells .com 6 years ago? And it's different. Gotcha. And then the lawyers are just like, no.
Right. Because they could put up some Hitler stuff on there and then Adult Swim is liable.
Or they're just lazy too. Like,
yeah,
there's a possibility,
right.
You know what I mean? Like I had one character named something Jerry Lee Boggs, and then they looked up and like, there was a Jerry Lee Boggs that played football in 1968 in Louisiana. So that's kind of like a wrestler. So no, we got to change the name. You're like, fucking really? It's like, it's the era we live in.
Gavin concludes, some validation for Rob. I heard Herb in a rap song. Rapper Spose from Maine in his song Salami. The line is, I got guitars wailing like a Japanese fisherman. Plus, I got all my words pronounced. I'm no pretender, a defender of the herbs and clowns. I put it down.
Nice. Validated. Ka-ching.
Yeah, I'm into it. I want Herb back in the lexicon. I want it in the Kendrick Lamar Drake feud somehow. Yes. Like from my mouth to Kendrick's ears, maybe. We have from Brendan. I'm a listener from Australia.
Oh,
good day, mate.
Yeah. Oh, you didn't tell me that one was from Australia.
At one point, he's got another one that I didn't ask. At one point, Kurt Angle's finishing move was changed from the Olympic Slam to the Angle Slam at the request of the Olympic Committee. Does Tommy recall this happening, and what conversations were there with the Olympic representatives?
I know nothing about that other than what you just said. Like sometimes like it's going to be fine. Change it to the Angle Slam. I do know this, which makes Kurt Angle so great. This still was of that era of, pro wrestling was forever was kind of looked down upon. And there was always this thing of like, especially with amateur wrestlers, like, well, that's not real wrestling. And so Kurt Angle himself got a lot of heat from a lot of like, amateur wrestlers and in that ilk. I say amateur wrestler, that kind of style.
Yeah.
And because it's like, oh, you're just like, you're using your fame here to like parody that. And I think he really he squished all that. Cause now it's like, well, if you're an athlete and from whatever ilk, you could go be in a movie, you could go be a movie star and you wouldn't get the same shame as like, doing this, even though it's a closer rub. So I do remember that. And he just like, so funny, like, who cares? I'm tough enough to, and then also,
bring
and
it.
And the fact that he just became so much bigger than his abilities because he was so humorous and so just, you know what I mean? He just took to that pro wrestling model, which is sure the athleticism, sure that, but that kind of style and the promos and everything. So he just hit everything out of the park so good that I think he squished all that. So take it, and it's fairly ridiculous to be like, well, you know what? That people actually talked somewhere, some kind of committee. Do you see what Angle's doing on wrestling? Yeah, it's called the Olympic Slam. I better call Jim. What do you think we ought to do? Yeah, I don't know. Let's have a meeting. Like, well, can we sue him? Let's get in contact with the lawyer. Like, come on, the whole. Especially when you look at
they're very protective of their copyrights.
When you look at the financial shenanigans of the fucking Olympics and what they've done in their, it's all so heady and pretentious. Like, yeah, we got to stop him. He's calling it the Olympic Slam. So fine.
Brendan has one last question. What are your views on how badly the invasion angle was botched? Could have been a multi-year storyline. Instead, was done in about 6 months. The lack of star power on the Alliance side was a major issue. I'd have to agree.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I mean, look, we all can say major storylines that could have, would have, should have. It's tough. That's part of, there is, I will call it pro wrestling Darwinism. You know what I mean? For whatever, all things have to work out in so many ways and sure star power and moments get over and whatever. So things kind of naturally fold or grow or evolve, so, to call it a botch, it's Darwinism.
Yeah. I think what hurt it was Vince McMahon's stubbornness with his wallet. He didn't want to buy out those WCW contracts for the big names. And so it just looked like an uneven feud. It didn't look believable when the top guys on the WCW side were only DDP and Booker T. That wasn't enough. They needed to bring in a Flair or Gold. Like if they just paid for one or two guys like Flair or Goldberg, guys that came in anyway, as their contracts ended when they didn't have to collect those checks. I think it would have been a lot more successful and a lot more engaging. Because I feel like the Invasion pay-per-view itself had like the second largest buy rate of that year after WrestleMania, just on the gimmick. So I feel like they would have made that money back even more if they would have spent it. But I understand also the politics of like, you're paying The Rock this much and then you're going to pay Bill Goldberg more than that to buy him out, just to then pay him an annual salary.
Absolutely fair. And you're right. And I would say could have. And also I think it just, something like that took a whole sort of all hands on deck mentality of like, we're going to do this monstrous thing. And I don't know if that was exactly possible. A lot for the reasons you said. It's one thing to be like, oh my God, let's, and that's part of the thing about writing and booking. Oh God, I can imagine this and this will happen and everyone will get on the same page. But wrestling is a lot like sports in the sense that like, oh, you do have to deal with all these people's contracts and you do have to, you know what I mean? It isn't like just like, write a script and put it out there. There were so many moving parts, and I don't think it had that kind of momentum from the office, so to speak, where like, here's this big thing we're going to do. It was kind of like, okay, we'll try it. And if it gets this major momentum, we'll keep it going. And no, you know what I mean?
I guess also a big part of it was that they couldn't get a TV deal for WCW either. Because they had just negotiated a deal with Spike.
Right.
To move from USA to Spike. And then, so basically it was like an exclusive thing where WWE can only be on Viacom channels, who owned Spike at the time. And so they were trying to get WCW on like Turner. And then they were like, no, you can't, like, if you're owning them, you can't do that. And they didn't want to air it on their own channels, which was weird to me. And then they had that idea where they were going to make Raw a WCW show and SmackDown a WWE show.
Yeah.
And then they tried that Booker T Buff Bagwell match, which it's like, come on.
Yeah, and the whole thing was, I think, in even the era of the smart mark growing, knowing like this isn't really a big collision course between these two things. That's gone. It's all umbrella owned. You know what I mean? It just and nothing. And again, even how you put out stuff, that's probably a lot of the behind the scenes of like, well, what about this? We could do this. Yeah, maybe this, but this is a problem. I don't know, but let's try this. It just immediately like, ooh, this is not on super steady ground. So. Pro wrestling Darwinism killed it.
Well, thank you, Brendan. We have one last batch of questions from Jonathan, who says, first he says, I agree with Rob. I prefer clean finishes, but there are places for non-clean finishes. Oh, a fellow clean finish smart marking.
Yeah.
SmackDown this past week, he writes, as I'm writing this, I think he means modern SmackDown, was a 20-minute women's title match that ended with a DQ, and stuff like that is where I prefer a clean finish. That's exactly what my complaint was, is like, why am I investing 20 minutes in a match that has no finish?
This is true. That has something to do with the length of the match, Sure.
Yeah. He concludes, I actually think wrestling nowadays is the best we've gotten in terms of clean finishes. Non-clean finishes back in the day often being because someone felt like being pinned make them look weak, which was always silly to me. And then he says he has a series of questions about the Royal Rumble 2000 that he wanted to ask. So very timely.
Let's stop that for a second, because I don't disagree with what he's saying, but I was thinking about that. Like, getting pinned making you look weak? It depends on different characters too. Like I always use the example of like someone like when Kevin Nash and Scott Hall were the outsiders. They ate pinfalls constantly, but they didn't give a shit. So they took no power away from them. It didn't do a bad thing for them because they, were on the mic and they were. Someone maybe like up and coming who's not in, like, doesn't have that. First of all, I'm over because I'm 7 foot or any kind of things. It's case by case. You know what I mean? The pinfalls hurting someone or, not hurting someone. And then it's also like your trust in, like, a lot of times you can make people like eat pinfalls and lose, but then get heat and, it's a good thing to like, oh, we're going to make you a heel because you're this or that or the other thing. So it's more complicated than just pinfall or not being weak. But it was a thing that I think this guy's right. Like, it's like, too much is put on it, just the pinfall itself. Like, I'm losing. No, I look weak. Well, guess what? You kind of suck. Your promos suck. You win. And so what? You know what I mean? I've seen many cases of people eating the pinfall, getting more over at the end of it than the victor, et cetera. So
some of his questions about the Royal Rumble 2000. What, if any, were the original plans for Taz? What precipitated his downfall after such an awesome debut?
Well, that was a classic, just a time-honored thing that I often didn't agree with. And unless someone had like big stature coming from one federation to the other, it's almost like it happened with Jericho too. It's like explosive debut. Now you got to eat shit for a while because you're from somewhere else. And
I hated this WWF pattern.
Yeah.
Yes,
and it
frustrated me so much.
Yeah. And to me, it was like either based in like, now that'll prove how we're really the place to be. Like, doesn't fucking matter. It doesn't happen in other sports. We signed a great free agent. Yeah. Well, he's not going to just come in and start scoring goals right away. Why the fuck not? He's not going to come in and start draining threes for us. he isn't, like,
exactly. Yeah.
I don't agree with it. But, so I would say, there's a couple things, and I'll just frankly say, like, Vince, he always said, like, I'm always looking for Mighty Mouse. That was a quote he always said about a small guy who's like, can tear him up. And obviously Rey Mysterio had great success, and that's just a height thing. And Taz had a different thing. A couple things that fucked him was, I think, and I don't know where this came from, where there's everyone be like, a lot of people his size or whatever. Oh, I don't want to take a lot of those crazy suplexes from him. And he's shorter, and I'm not speaking like, I'm just know that was in the air and that was a thing. And so that already is like,
it makes sense. Everyone's very protective in that moment.
And whether it's like for safety or for character, it didn't really matter. It was in the air. And that immediately is like the human suplex machine, except what? He's not the human suplex machine. So that was part of it. And then there was a hardcore match or something where, and this happens, like, there just was a moment where Vince was like, look, he's dogging it out there, whether he was or wasn't, because he was selling, because it was like
what is dogging? Like
he's, just looking slow and shitty, and I don't believe he did, because it was a weird hardcore match. And he was like, it's just something like, I don't know, Vince saw a match and he was like, and that like didn't do good.
It's like a switch went off. He just decided,
switch went off,
done.
And then, so he had to climb out of that. But then, in true fashion, he went into the announcing and was like, oh, he's golden. So, so that was good. So,
yeah, if anything, it extended his career.
Yeah, sure. Right? Like, and, like I said, I'm just fair or not, I'm just saying that's what happened.
Yeah.
Certainly so.
Did you guys know coming out of the tables match what the plan was for the Hardys and Dudleys at Mania? Or did the tables match make you pencil that into Mania?
Yeah, I think probably the latter. Definitely didn't know.
Yeah.
In fact, this whole era, like, there's long-term ideas, but there was no, you can do your Venn diagramming or your storyboard things, but remember, it's always, and subject to change constantly, based on a lot of things. One of them, the idiosyncrasies of Vince McMahon, and like, this is all set. No, it isn't, and what have you. So, yeah, by virtue of the success of them, like, it carried on, I would say.
He noted this was the first WWE pay-per-view that aired on Channel 4 in the UK, which was broadcast television. I remember it aired with commercials. I remember reading.
Interesting.
And that the channel was very upset at the Mae Young segment. Do you remember hearing about any of the heat for the Mae Young? Which is odd to me, because I feel like in Europe, they're much less sensitive about nudity.
Maybe because it was the veiny prosthetic, or I don't know, but
maybe.
Yeah. We'd hear about stuff like this almost just like that. Well, I heard they're very upset. And then like, well, are they upset about the numbers? No, they're not upset. Fine. You know what I mean? It's like, it was just more of a badge of honor. Like, oh, that's good. And a lot of that stuff is just the politics of like Channel 4 being like, I can imagine, and I'm speculating, but like whoever the executives were like, oh, these are great numbers. This is good business. That looks distasteful. Put out a press release that says, we're mad about that. There, it's covered. If anyone, the conservative people complain, I know, we complained. So none of that really means anything.
Jonathan, I'm skipping a few of the questions because they're ones that we answered directly in the Rumble review. I believe you sent this before the Rumble review that we posted. So I will ask then, what was the reaction backstage after the Triple H and Cactus Jack match? Mick Foley said in shoot interviews that he and Triple H never told anyone that Foley was taking the pedigree on the thumbtacks. Was there any heat backstage? Also, was there any reaction to Triple H's leg being sliced open?
No, other than, the usual, like, oh, are they all right? When you come back, because, like, and then like, whoa, that was something, everyone was riding high. And, I think you always got to remember, like, these are just still like one night. It's a pay-per-view, but it's like, oh, that was great. Okay. Some people are gone. Okay. Now we got to go to Philadelphia tomorrow. Some people are gone. You know what I mean? It's like, whatever sports like basketball and hockey where there's 80 games, this is just so continuous that there isn't like, we always have like a quick post-mortem meeting in Vince's office. And then, depending what, then you're on, you got to split and you got to, be like, especially, the boys, they got to be like, well, got to get somewhere, get in my motel, get some sleep, get my work in tomorrow. And tomorrow we're in Philadelphia and we, you got to work. So there isn't a lot of like, carrying on about that,
And was there any idea to use the Radicalz for the Rumble, or could that not happen because of the contracts? I'm assuming they weren't quite signed yet.
Well, like I said, this is how it worked for me. If I remember correctly, it wasn't until after this. I think so. The Rumble was on a Sunday. Then we went to Philadelphia, and then SmackDown.
Yeah, I think I was reading in the Observer as I was doing my research for the Rumble that they had only come to Stamford after they had gotten their release the weekend of the Rumble. Mm-hmm. They gotten that from WCW because it was very tumultuous. And there was also, I guess, Shane Douglas and Conan were also a part of their crew, but maybe WWE signaled to the other four that they weren't going to pick those guys up. So the four Radicalz kind of broke away in secret. And there's like a story about how Shane Douglas was like, hey, are you guys in Stamford right now? And they're like, no, we're not in Stamford. But like people saw them in Stamford. Right. Like you're saying, this is probably when you saw them at the gym.
Yeah, I saw them, I think would have been on, so Wednesday was travel, like on that Thursday. And like, holy shit. And so this would be questions for probably Jim Ross, who was, talent relations.
Yeah. Because they're keeping all that away from you. They don't want anyone. They don't even want some of the other wrestlers to know, their friends to know. So I can see how they kept it from you.
Oh, of course. And also, you got to understand, there's so much juggling going on all the time with contracts. And there's so many things of like, why tell anyone until it's happened? And when it's this, you know what I mean? Because then it's just murky. Hey, we're talking with this person. I sent a feeler out to this one. I got a call into this person, and this might happen. Then we couldn't. You know what I mean? So half of it goes away. So why even keep people abreast for? Okay, let me think about that. No. So this was that's what was so exciting about that time. It was great to just see like, wow, things are riding high. Here's the roster, and holy shit, look who's in the team. Just they're here. Like and then and then even
I'm very excited to get to the Radicalz.
Yeah, and even this is how fast it was. I always say this, like, I remember a time it was like Vince talking like, oh, what should we name the group? This, that, how about this? And then people would give suggestions, and then he said something like, one of them I think said like the Radicalz or something, like, okay, that's it. It may have been like one of them said, and then they comes back like, you're the Radicalz, and they're like, okay, we're the Radicalz. You know what I mean? That's how just
with a Z.
Yeah, with a Z. I think that may have been my contribution to be like, like a hair metal band with a Z. Maybe not. So then you're like, oh yeah, okay. It's always like putting things with a Z or an X. Well, I love it.
Yeah.
Get an X in there. Oh, how funny.
Well, thank you all for submitting. These are all great questions. I thought very thought provoking,
very smart.
Let a lot of
Mark questions.
We appreciate all. Of course, you could keep sending us questions. We'll do more of these. This is fun. It's fun to jump around since we're kind of strict with our timeline, so to speak. It's cool to just jump around and hear some of these stories for stuff we won't get to for like another few months or whatever. TFTattitudeera@gmail.com. That's the mailing address to send us your questions. And of course, TFT Attitude Era is our handle on social media, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, and on TikTok. So hang out with us. And thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Tuning in. That's old school. Tune in.
That's right. That's right. Don't flip that dial, folks. Well, now you can, because we're out of here. It's been Tales from the Attitude Era.